Super excited to now be joined by the voice of Cal Athletics, Justin Allegri. Justin, thanks so much for taking the time today.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's good to be on with you.
So, I want to start kind of at a wider lens and then we'll narrow things down in this football squad. 2 seasons ago, you never would have thought Syracuse and Cal would be playing each other. How has the first kind of rodeo in the ACC been for this program?
Yeah, it's obviously been a little bit of a culture shock, right? Because this team only ever knew the Pac-12 or whatever it was called prior to that. So it's been a little bit different. Obviously, the travel has been a big part of that, but it's nice to see some new cities. I got to explore Wake Forest and the surrounding areas last week. Pitt was a fun atmosphere for a game. So yeah, it's been fun, and it's fun to interact with new fan bases and new people. It's been a good experience so far.
And now, kind of looking at that Bears schedule, there was started off good, but then there was that 4 game losing streak. But you look closely; those games were close. If those games go another way, this could be a ranked Cal team. How unfortunate was it to not get out a win, especially against the likes of Miami or Pitt or even NC State?
Yeah, I mean, you can dive into each of those losses, right? Florida State, where we didn't really know at the time what that Florida State team was going to be like, but now you look at it and say, well, gosh, that's the only win they have all season to this point. So that was frustrating. You missed some field goals in that game. You come home against Miami. It was college game day on campus for the first time. The atmosphere was just tremendous, huge sellout crowd, 25-point third quarter lead. And then Cam Ward did what he did. And then you go back-to-back opponents against Pitt on the road and NC State, where you drive down and get yourself in a position to kick a field goal for the game winner and miss both times. So opportunities missed, obviously. The team has done a really good job. The coaching staff has done a really good job of not trying to dwell on the what ifs or what could have been, and just try and keep focus moving forward, which you have to, right? You can't look back and say, well, gosh, we could be a 8-win team right now if it was only for one or two things. That's true, but it doesn't help you where you are right now. And so the focus is a week by week, and now the focus is to try and get that sixth win and get yourself bowl eligible, and then move on to the next week.
And looking back at kind of the last 2 weeks, really, the offense has really taken off, scoring over 30 points. Is there something that you've kind of pinpointed that has allowed this offense to be so explosive in recent weeks?
Well, in particular, last week it was the first time we saw two top tier wide receivers that were brought on to catch the football a ton for this Cal team. And Keon Grays, who was a transfer from Ohio State, and Tobias Merriweather, who's a transfer from Notre Dame. Both of them were injured in fall camp. Both of them had been out prior to the Wake Forest game. So they were on a snap count limitation just because they wanted to make sure that they were kind of eased into their roles. And still, they're not fully ready to go. They still have some catching up to do. But it was good to see them, and it helped Fernando Mendoza, the quarterback, kind of use more options, see more opportunities, 11 different receivers in that game. But I will say that one of the things that the coaching staff still wants to see more of is an established run game. And I think a lot of the games have been close in the fourth quarter because the Bears have not been able to successfully run use that play clock to their advantage and get those first downs on the ground. Jaden Ott was out for a good amount of time this year. He was the Pac-12 leading rusher last year. So if we can get a little more consistency out of Jaden and that offensive line unit to allow Jaden to do some things, then we're really talking. But the passing game and Fernando has certainly been impressive this year.
You mentioned the quarterback, Fernando Mendoza. He throws the ball a lot. Just looking at his stats, throws it a lot. Is that arm strength and accuracy the best attributes of his game, would you say?
Yeah, and Fernando, he was not really on the radar as a starter last year. He was the third string player coming out of fall camp. Very young, kind of bright-eyed type of player, worked himself into a starting role. So we're only seeing Fernando. I think this will be his 15th career start coming into this game, which is, still relatively small numbers. But the arm strength is great. To me, it's the decision making, and especially from year over year, from last year to now, the decision making and processing a defense and making sure you're getting it to the right player, or a player that is going to get you some positive yards, or cutting bait when he needs to, or using his legs when he needs to. That's been the difference. Because Fernando last year, I mean, he threw 10 interceptions. He fumbled it a couple of times, but we just have not seen that from him this year. He has thrown a few picks, but just not nearly as many mistakes, and a lot just better decision making to help lead the team down the field rather than trying to do something that he maybe shouldn't be doing.
And I know I watched a few press conferences this week, and kind of a few questions from the media was, is he getting sacked too much? He's got 31 sacks on the year. Is that a problem with him, or is that more of an O-line issue?
I think the O line is something that is really what the Bears need to firm up here over the last couple of weeks. It's been a combination of five different guys so many times this year, and for the first time this season, we saw the five on the field in those particular spots against Wake Forest for the first time. So that has been a big difference. And when you don't have consistency in the offensive line, the ground game suffers, the pass blocking suffers, and that certainly is a big part of it. I think against Wake Forest, I think you could point at the offensive line for a few of those, but there were also a couple of times where I think Fernando was thinking, gosh, I'm going to throw it so many times this week. Let me try and get an extra beat and see if that guy gets some separation. And he took some sacks too. But I really want to see this offensive line try and find a rhythm just to establish the run game to take a little bit of pressure off of Mendoza and allow some more deep ball threats from Fernando. So, yeah, I think the offensive line is a big key the last few weeks.
You just mentioned it, that running game. You've talked about it a little bit, but Javian Thomas, or Jet Thomas, as they call him, how impressive have you been with him in this kind of a breakout second year it's been for him?
Yeah, the Jet, he got injured last year. We knew the potential that he had with the speed, plus speed type player. And when you have him and Jaden Ott, guys that can split the safeties and take off and run, obviously you want to see those sweeps, those handoffs to the edge that get you some space, make a man miss, and see if you can get some extra yardage that way. What I still want to see from both of those guys is the ability to run between the tackles. And the Jet has done it a little bit this year. Jaden did it a lot last year. But again, it goes back to the offensive line play to open up those holes for them. And I think that's where you're seeing a little bit of the numbers skewed toward the passing game because they haven't been able to establish that ground attack. But that's not to say that these two, and especially the Jet, are not potent and not fast, because that is what their game is. Get to a spot where you can make a man miss in some space and then just explosive speed. The Jet, I mean, he gets to full speed in one or two steps, and when he gets going, he is tough to track down. So they're fun. They're fun when they can get some space.
So do you think the reason that these running backs aren't getting a ton of carries or a ton of touches is because it just isn't a big trust in the O line? Is that kind of why it's almost kind of a heavy passing game?
I think there's part of that, but then you look at Fernando's numbers, and when you're completing
Yeah.
70% of your passes, don't try and fix what's working, right? Maybe in the fourth quarter where we've seen the numbers offensively from opposing teams climb, that's where you want to see the ground game going, and that's where you want to see some first downs on the ground, like I mentioned before. Yeah, I think I think it goes back to the offensive line, and the coaching staff talks about that too. But when you're throwing it, a lot of bubble screens, a lot of crossers, a lot of tight end play in the pass game that has worked for them. The Bears are scoring when they need to score. Red zone numbers, I think, also are a big part of that. Going into this game, I'm not sure exactly what the numbers were, but going into last week's game, it's 50% of the red zone trips for the Bears end up in touchdowns. They need to get more scores in the paint rather than field goals. Ground game definitely helps that. So we'll see what they can do this week.
So when I've watched some Cal's highlights, just a few games, the first guy that really stood out to me was the tight end, Jack Enris. Just looks like an NFL type tight end. He's got that like Travis Kelsey built to him. How impressed are you with him?
Well, and he was a walk-on last
Yeah.
year, so earned a scholarship last season because he just jumped off the page. Him and Fernando Mendoza really had a good connection last year. They're roommates, and so they kind of knew that they were on the same page a lot of the time. To me, the difference from Jack this year, he worked on his speed from a season ago, which is not something you really expect from a tight end all that much these days. But he also does a great job in the blocking game as well. But there was a play that he had in a game earlier this season where he outran a corner, and it was not close. So he's got the ability to take a hit. He can block. He's that big body, like you mentioned, but then he can sprint too. So when you look at those tools, you understand. Well, gosh, your tight end is your leading receiver. What's that about? But man, I mean, he plays the role of a wide receiver. He plays the role of a blocker. He does it all. He's been really impressive.
So do you kind of think this offense has another gear to unlock if you could get those new wideouts involved and get the running game a little bit more touches?
Undoubtedly, I was just on a call with Coach Wilcox today. He said we still haven't played a full game where we can hang our hat and say that is the offense we wanted to see this year. And it goes back to everything we've already talked about. But you're right. It was good to see Merriweather and Grays. I think they're expecting to see a little bit more from them. And last week was the most healthy the Bears had been because Corey Dyches had missed some time too. He's the second tight end for the Bears. We talked about the running backs missing some time, talked about the offensive line. That was the most healthy they've been. By all accounts this week, everybody comes back. No one got injured against Wake Forest on the offensive side of the ball, and everybody has a little bit more of experience, in particular those two wide receivers you mentioned. So yeah, we'll see. Execution is a big part of that because the penalties have been just really tough to take. We saw last week against Wake Forest a holding penalty nullify a touchdown. Been a lot of penalties on the offensive line this year, a lot of false starts, a lot of holding. Cal is one of the most penalized teams in the country. So clean up the penalties, get some better ground attack, and who knows what this offense will look like.
Yeah, and now kind of swinging over to the defensive side. Noel Williams has 7 interceptions on the year. Like, I know that's, kind of obviously there's some skill behind that, but that's still a crazy stat when I looked at that.
Right, and it's something where you kind of look at it and go, okay, maybe a few of those are just right spot, right time,
Yeah.
ball thrown at them. And yeah, you get that amount of interceptions. Occasionally, one or two are going to be kind of just luck of the spot. Um, but for the most part, he is just reading the quarterback, jumping routes, and being faster than the wide receiver to get to the ball. I mean, he worked incredibly hard in the offseason. Talked to scouts, talked to coaches, and said, hey, look, what improves my draft stock to play in the NFL? Because last year he had a good year, but his numbers just were, kind of average numbers. And he knew he wanted to improve because he wanted to play in the NFL. And most of what he was told was you need to get a little bit bigger, you need to get a little bit faster, and you need to make some splashy plays and read the defense or read the quarterback and get your nose in there and break up some passes. And that's exactly what he's done. He's got the interceptions, but he's also got a couple of pass breakups too, where it's like, man, the closing speed just because he read where that ball was going was excellent. And it's remarkable to see him. We saw him. I think it was 4 interceptions in the first 3 games, and it was kind of like, oh, this is great. How is he going to keep up this pace? Well, he's done it. It's just been remarkable. So that's going to be an interesting matchup this week because you have such a great passing offense against such a great pass defense in the Bears and a veteran pass defense in that secondary. It's going to be a matchup where you're probably going to win some, you're going to lose some, and you'll have to see where it ends up at the end of the game.
And he'll be going up against a quarterback, Kyle McCord, that threw 5 interceptions this year. So he'll maybe have a chance to add that number. And another player McCord could be seeing is the linebacker, Xavier Carlton. He's got 9 sacks on the year. How big of a part of the Cal defensive game plan is he?
That whole linebacking unit, whether you talk about the offense or the outside linebackers or the inside linebackers, has been to me the most impressive unit overall, offense or defense this year. Carlton kind of quietly does it too. I mean, he just is very consistent. If you give him an inch, he'll take a mile. He'll get into the backfield quickly. Does a really good job off of stunts to the 2 down linemen that Cal usually plays. He plays violent. He plays physical. He's really fun to watch. You have him. You have David Reese. You have the inside backers in Cade Uluave and Teddy Buchanan have been very sound overall. They're just kind of where they need to be at all times. And if you get through to the second level, they're making the tackle. Both of them at one point were on pace to have 100 tackle seasons this year. And I know Cade missed some time, so maybe not necessarily on that pace now. And then Liam Johnson, who made the interception last week, and Hunter Barth kind of emerged here late season as guys in that linebacking unit. So you're right. I mean, whether it's trying to get into the backfield and get a sack with guys like Carlton or making a play and making a tackle, those guys have been really fun.
So how do you think this Cal defense stacks up against what is a Syracuse offense that's good, but it hasn't looked great in recent weeks? They got a dynamic running back in the Quentin Allen, and they also have some really good receivers. It just hasn't really been complete performances. Can Cal continue to kind of sputter the Orange offense?
Well, to me, you got a quarterback that's experienced and he makes the right reads and knows how to move his offense. Uses the running back out of the backfield exceptionally well. And he's going to put up numbers, right? You're not gonna limit the scoring from Syracuse. You have to try and limit the momentum that they have. If this game gets into a shootout, Syracuse is probably thinking, all right, this is where we want the game to be. So if you're Cal, you got to keep doing what you're doing. Put some pressure. Make sure that McCord feels a hit or two early in the game, and then force a turnover somehow. Whether it be in man coverage where you're just trying to play your best there one on one, or try and using some blitzing to make him flush from the pocket and get uncomfortable. But we've seen some good quarterback play this year, and McCord is right up there with the top that Cal has seen this season.
And for Syracuse, kind of almost from a fan perspective as well, what should they expect when they, flick on the TV and see this Cal atmosphere? How has it been this year?
Well, yeah, the Miami game was the best I've seen, and that
Yeah.
was the first sellout of a non-Stanford game, a non-rivalry game
Mhm.
at home, I believe, since 2016. When it gets sold out, it is absolutely electric. It's 58,000. It's a beautiful atmosphere with the hills in the background, and it's loud. It's fun. But we haven't seen a ton of sellouts. We've seen just kind of average crowds, and I think that's kind of what we'll see this week. It's an afternoon game in the Bay Area. Still, the weather's been pretty good, so I would wager somewhere in the 30,000 for attendance here this week. But they do a great job of game day atmosphere, traditions, and I think hopefully it'll show on TV for some of the first time viewers that are seeing that atmosphere. And if some Syracuse fans are making the trip out, Berkeley is a fun town. It's a very walkable town. Don't try and park near the stadium because it'll be frustrating for you. Take public transit to get up there and enjoy Berkeley.
Yeah, I think Syracuse fans can kind of relate to that with the dome. Not too much parking
There
around
you
the
go.
dome. Justin, thank you so much for taking the time. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.